They thought locking me out would silence me. Honey, they didn't realize they'd just given me the loudest microphone in town. It was a Thursday morning, 9:07 a.m. To be exact, when my own grandson's wife stood in the doorway of my house, the house Robert and I had lived in for 42 years, and said the words that cut deeper than any knife. "You're just in the way." No raised voice, no explanation, just those 4 words, clipped and cruel, followed by the sound of the deadbolt sliding shut behind me. I stood there with my overnight bag in one hand, the other still clutching Robert's rosary like it might somehow rewind the moment. Behind the glass, I could see them. My grandson Derek, staring at the floor like a scolded schoolboy, and his wife Tiffany, arms folded, lips pursed, triumphant. It wasn't an argument, it was an eviction. And here's the thing, honey. When you've spent 68 years being the good wife, the patient mother, the kind grandma, you think humiliation doesn't sting anymore. But standing there on that porch, every wrinkle on my face burned like fresh shame. I wanted to scream. I wanted to beg Derek to remember the nights I rocked him to sleep when his parents were working doubles, the afternoons I scraped together money for his baseball gear. But he wouldn't even meet my eyes. Tiffany had her claws in him deep, and her voice was the only one he heard now. So I didn't scream. I didn't beg. I did what every woman who's underestimated has to do. I walked away with my head high, even if my heart was crumbling like ash inside me. If you're watching this, honey, I'd tell you now. Subscribe and tell me where you're listening from. Because what I'm about to say isn't just my story, it's a warning and a roadmap. You'll want to stay with me until the end. As I shuffled down the driveway, Tiffany's final words echoed, "Just in the way." That was my title now. Not wife, not mother, not even grandmother, just in the way. But let me tell you something they didn't know. Pawns can become queens. That's chess, that's life. And I wasn't about to be anyone's pawn anymore. I dragged my suitcase, Robert's old leather Samsonite, cracked at the corners down the block, past the hedges I'd trimmed every spring, past the mailbox where Derek used to stick firecrackers as a kid. Every step away from that house felt like a funeral march. Not for Robert, not for my home, but for the illusion that family means loyalty. By 9:30 a.m., I was standing at the bus stop with exactly $240 cash in my purse, my Medicare card, and the sickening realization that I was, for the first time in my life, homeless. But listen carefully. Humiliation is gasoline. Pour enough of it on someone who's been underestimated long enough. And honey, you don't get a victim, you get an inferno. I checked into a roadside motel at 10:18 a.m., the kind with a flickering neon sign and sheets that smelled faintly of bleach and cigarettes. $50 a night. Affordable. That's what the clerk said, eyes darting at my trembling hands, counting out crumpled bills. Sitting on that sagging bedspread, I replayed Tiffany's words again and again. Just in the way. It wasn't insult, it was erasure. She didn't want me as part of their family, their home, their life. But here's the irony. In her rush to erase me, Tiffany wrote me into the only role she couldn't control, the Avenger. I stared at Robert's photo on my phone, the one from our 40th anniversary dinner. He was smiling in his pressed suit, wine glass raised. "Don't let them push you out, Maggie," he used to say whenever family tension bubbled. Well, Robert, they pushed. Now it's my turn to shove back. At 11:03 a.m., I made myself a vow as binding as any legal document. I would walk back into that house, not as an unwanted guest, but as the woman who held all the cards. How? You'll see. Because, honey, this story has more twists than a pretzel factory. For now, remember this. When someone tells you you're just in the way, they've already admitted one thing. They're scared of how powerful you'll be when you finally stop moving aside. And me? I wasn't stepping aside anymore. They always say grief brings families together. Honey, that's the kind of lie Hallmark cards are built on. What grief really does is strip the paint off the walls so you can see the rot underneath. It had been only 6 weeks since Robert's funeral. I can still see the lilies sagging in their vases, the casserole dishes stacked like bricks of pity on my kitchen counter. People came, cried, promised they'd check in, and then they vanished. Except Derek, my grandson, and Tiffany, his wife. They didn't vanish, they swooped. The first time they came by after the funeral, Tiffany carried a pie from the fancy bakery, downtown Blueberry, with lattice crust. She set it on my table like she was staging a photo shoot for a lifestyle magazine. "We're just so worried about you, Grandma," she purred, her pearl earrings catching the light. Worried. That was her word. But her eyes? Cold as a locked vault. Derek nodded along like a bobblehead, not once looking me in the eye. "We just don't want you to feel alone." That was visit number 1. By visit number 3, they weren't bringing pies. They were bringing pamphlets. I'll never forget the sound of Tiffany's manicured nails tapping on the glossy cover. "Look, Margaret, Willow Creek Retirement Community. Isn't it darling? They have a shuffleboard court and a hair salon on site. You'd make friends. You'd have activities." Activities. As though my life needed rebranding, like I was a bored toddler instead of a 68-year-old woman who once ran a business, raised 3 children, and buried the love of her life. I laughed then. A short, sharp laugh that wasn't humor so much as disbelief. "Tiffany, I have a house. I have my routines. I don't need activities." Her smile never faltered, but her voice dropped, slick as oil. "Grandma, you've got to be practical. Derek and I need space. You're just, well," she paused, savoring the cruelty. "You're just in the way." There it was again. The line she wielded like a weapon. I turned to Derek, praying for a spark of recognition, a flicker of the boy who once built treehouses in my backyard. "Derek?" My voice cracked. "Do you agree with her?" His lips parted, but nothing came out. He stared at the floor, shoulders hunched, like a man halfway drowned. Tiffany had her hand on his arm, her nails pressing little crescents into his sleeve. And in that silence, he gave me my answer. By the 5th visit, they weren't even pretending anymore. Tiffany walked through my door without knocking, wearing heels that clicked against my hardwood floors like gunshots. She pointed at my china cabinet, at Robert's desk, at the grandfather clock we'd bought on our 25th anniversary. "Derek and I have plans," she said. "Open concept, modern. You'll thank us when the house finally looks alive." Alive. My home had more life in its creaking floorboards than she'd ever have in her soul. I wanted to throw her out right then. But honey, the thing about predators is you don't wrestle them head on. You wait. You watch. You let them bare their teeth until everyone sees what they are. That night, I sat at the kitchen table alone, sipping lukewarm tea, staring at the pamphlet for Willow Creek. The smiling faces of seniors in staged bingo games mocked me from the page. I thought of Robert's voice, calm and steady. "Don't let them push you out, Maggie." Too late. They weren't just pushing, they were shoving. At 8:47 p.m., I heard Tiffany's laughter from the living room as she flipped through channels on my television. Derek's voice floated in, low and uncertain. "Maybe we should wait. She's still grieving." And Tiffany's reply, sharp as broken glass. "Grief doesn't pay bills. This house is wasted on her. She's just the wife, just the grandmother, just in the way." I froze in the hallway, unseen, the words searing into me like a brand. Just the wife. My entire marriage, dismissed with 3 words. By 9:15, I was in my bedroom packing a small bag. Robert's photo, my rosary, 2 sets of clothes. Not because I was surrendering, but because I knew what was coming. They thought they'd cornered me. They thought I'd go quietly, that I'd shuffle into Willow Creek and play bingo until my hands shook too much to hold the cards. But here's the truth. When someone tries to write you off, the smartest thing you can do is pick up the pen and write yourself back in. Theirs was a story of greed. Mine was about to be one of revenge. As I zipped my bag, I whispered to Robert's photo, "They don't know who they're dealing with, do they?" The clock on the nightstand clicked to 9:30. Time, it seemed, was on my side now. Because pawns, they only look harmless until they cross the board. And honey, I was already halfway there. They say betrayal is loud, but mine came with the quiet click of a lock sliding shut. It was a Tuesday morning, 10:12 a.m. I remember the time because I'd just finished folding Robert's old sweaters, the ones that still smelled faintly of cedar and aftershave. I set the box by the door, thinking I'd donate them when I was ready. That's when Tiffany walked in, heels echoing like a judge's gavel. "Margaret," she said, her voice bright with counterfeit sympathy. "We've made a decision." We. As though Derek's silence counted as participation. Kevin, their lawyer friend, slick hair, Slicker Smile stepped in behind her holding a manila envelope. My gut dropped. I didn't even need to open it to know it was about the house. "This place is just too much for you," Tiffany went on, eyes scanning my walls like a realtor staging a sale. "The stairs, the maintenance. It isn't safe. Derek and I are moving in today. You should be in a facility where they can take care of you properly." A facility. Like I was a broken appliance that needed storage until it rusted through. I stared at Derek. "This is my home. The one your grandfather and I built brick by brick. You had birthdays here, Derek. Christmas mornings. From photos on those stairs. And now you're handing me an eviction notice?" His lips moved, but only Tiffany's voice filled the room. "Actually, it's not an eviction notice. It's Dad's will. He left everything to Derek. We've just been generous, letting you stay this long." Generous. Like I was a stray dog they'd fed scraps to out of pity. I took the envelope. Inside was a photocopy of a Will Roberts signature at the bottom, or so they wanted me to believe. The words blurred for a moment as my heart pounded. According to this document, the house and all assets were Derek's. I was entitled to nothing. "That's not possible," I whispered. "Robert showed me his will years ago. He would never." Tiffany cut me off, her mask slipping to reveal the sneer beneath. "Face it, Margaret, you were just the wife. You don't understand investments. You don't understand money. You were a background." Background. 43 years of marriage boiled down to wallpaper. I felt my knees weaken, but I refused to let them see me fall. "And if I don't leave?" Tiffany tilted her head, her tone sharpening. "Then we'll have to get the courts involved. But I'd hate for this to get ugly. It's best if you pack a bag now." Now. Not tomorrow. Not next week. Now. By 11:30, Kevin was hauling my 2 suitcases out the door like trash bags headed for the curb. Tiffany handed me $200 in cash, folded neatly like a waitress tip. "This should cover a motel until you find something affordable," she said. "Try Maple Street Senior Living. Very affordable." Affordable. That one word stabbed deeper than any insult. My daughter-in-law was inheriting millions if her lies held up, and she was sending me to bargain bin housing like I was a burden to dispose of. They drove me in their BMW, Tiffany humming along to the radio like she hadn't just uprooted my life. Derek never looked back. At 12:14 p.m., we pulled into the parking lot of the Sunset Inn. The neon sign buzzed faintly, half its letters burnt out, so it read Sun Tea Inn. Kevin carried my bags inside, dropped them by the reception desk, and left without a word. Tiffany gave me one last saccharine smile. "This is for the best, Margaret. You'll see." Then the door closed, and I was alone. The Sunset Inn smelled of mildew and desperation. The walls were the color of old cigarettes, the carpet patterned with stains no cleaning product had ever conquered. I opened the door to my room, room 27, and found a bed with sheets thin enough to see through, towels folded like damp paper, and a bathroom faucet that coughed before it spit water. I sat on the mattress, its springs digging into my back, and clutched Robert's photograph. In less than 3 hours, I'd gone from homeowner to transient, discarded by the very family I'd once lived for. For a moment, I let the tears come. Hot, angry, silent tears. But then something sharper stirred beneath the grief. Doubt. Robert had been meticulous. He color-coded his files, balanced the checkbook to the penny, kept receipts from the 1,970 seconds. The man who once scolded me for misplacing a warranty slip would never leave me with nothing. And he certainly wouldn't trust Tiffany with his legacy. By 6:45 p.m., I was sitting at the small desk in that depressing room, my laptop perched on the peeling laminate. I searched for Robert's lawyer, Mr. Harrison Fitzgerald, a man with silver hair and a reputation for detail. The motel Wi-Fi cut out 3 times, but eventually, I found his office number. I wrote it down carefully on the back of Tiffany's affordable brochure, the irony not lost on me. As I stared at the number, my fear hardened into resolve. Tiffany thought she'd buried me in a budget motel, but all she'd really done was give me the quiet I needed to plan. At 7:03 p.m., I whispered to the empty room, "You think I'm finished? Watch me. Because pawns don't stay pawns forever. And honey, when I cross the board, queens fall." There's a certain humiliation in asking a bus driver if he gives a senior discount when your daughter-in-law just tossed you out of $1 million home. But honey, pride doesn't pay the fare. It was Wednesday morning, 9:22 a.m., when I climbed aboard the number 14 heading downtown. $2.75 bought me a seat that smelled faintly of fries and regret. My suitcases sat back at the Sunset Inn, guarded by a lock that looked older than I was. But I wasn't worried about my clothes. I was worried about the truth. Harrison Fitzgerald's office was on Main Street, tucked inside a sandstone building with brass letters polished to a shine. He'd been Robert's attorney for over 20 years. Real estate closings, business deals, even our will consultations, Robert always said, "Harrison never misses a comma." I walked into the lobby at 9:47. The secretary looked up, startled. "Mrs. Sullivan, we weren't expecting you." "Apparently, no one's been expecting me," I said, sharper than I intended. 5 minutes later, Harrison himself appeared. He was older than I remembered, his silver hair thinner, but his handshake was steady, warm. "Margaret, my dear, I was wondering when you'd come in. I tried calling after Robert's passing." "Victoria," he meant Tiffany, of course, but in this story names hardly matter. Greed doesn't care what you're called. "Told me you were traveling." Traveling. That was the lie she fed him while I was living out of a suitcase at the Sunset Inn. "Harrison," I said, my voice trembling, "I need to know about Robert's will." Tiffany told me. She told me he left everything to Derek, that I had nothing. The lawyer's eyes sharpened like a hawk catching sight of prey. "Nothing? Margaret, that's impossible. I handled Robert's estate personally." He ushered me into his office, all dark wood and the smell of leather-bound books. At precisely 10:06, he set a thick file folder on the desk between us. My heart thudded as he flipped it open, revealing the familiar loops of Robert's handwriting and his signature, neat and deliberate. "Your husband updated this 6 months before he passed," Harrison explained. He was concerned about certain attitudes he observed in the family. Concerned. That word alone made my breath catch. Robert had known. He'd seen Tiffany's coldness, Derek's weakness. He'd prepared for exactly this betrayal. Harrison adjusted his glasses and began to read aloud. "I, Robert James Sullivan, being of sound mind and body, do hereby bequeath to my beloved wife, Margaret Ann Sullivan, the following. Our primary residence at 847 Oakwood Drive, including all furnishings and personal effects. Additionally, I leave her 70% of all financial assets, investments, and accounts, totaling approximately $23 million. $23 million. My ears rang. To my grandson, Derek Sullivan, and his wife Tiffany, I leave the remainder, $10 million, to be held in trust. Disbursement is contingent upon their respectful treatment of my wife following my death." Contingent. A single word that flipped the entire board. I stared at Harrison, my throat dry. "So, I wasn't left with nothing?" "Nothing?" His voice rose with indignation. "Margaret, you were left with everything. The house, 70% of the assets, and if Derek and Tiffany fail to treat you with dignity, their entire share reverts to you." The irony hit me so hard, I almost laughed. Tiffany had been so desperate to claim her prize that she'd triggered the very clause designed to punish her greed. "Harrison," I whispered. "She gave me $200 in cash and told me to find a senior facility. She showed me a different will, a forgery." His face darkened. "Then we're dealing not just with cruelty, but with fraud, elder abuse, possibly even conspiracy." For the first time since Robert's funeral, I felt the weight in my chest lift, just slightly. I hadn't been forgotten. I hadn't been erased. Robert had protected me, even from the grave. At 10:42, Harrison leaned forward, eyes blazing. "Here's what we'll do, Margaret. First, we notify the banks. We freeze every account until the matter is sorted. We contact law enforcement about the forged documents. And then," he smiled, grim but triumphant, "then we let Tiffany and Derek learn that pawns don't just reach the other side of the board, they become queens." The phrase sent a shiver down my spine. For weeks, I'd been treated like a burden. Disposable. Background. But sitting there in Harrison's office, with Robert's real will in my hands, I finally understood. I wasn't background. I was the headline. By 11 a.m., papers were signed, calls were placed, and Operation Justice Harrison's term, not mine, was officially underway. I left the office clutching a certified copy of the will, the morning sun warm on my face. For the first time in months, I felt steady on my feet. Strong. The Sunset Inn still smelled like mildew when I returned, but that night, it didn't feel like a prison. It felt like a waiting room. The stage was set. And honey, when the curtain rose, Tiffany was going to learn exactly what kind of woman she had underestimated. Because the irony was so perfect, it was almost poetic. In trying to strip me of everything, she had handed me the weapon that would take it all back. Watch me. You'd be surprised how fast justice can move when the right lawyer makes the right calls. By 9:17 the next morning, Harrison had already sent certified notices to 3 banks, 2 brokerage firms, and the county clerk's office. Every account, every asset, every last cent Tiffany thought she controlled was officially frozen. The first domino had fallen. At 10:02 a.m., my prepaid flip phone buzzed. The screen lit up with a name I'd once loved to see, Derek, my grandson. But when I answered, it wasn't his voice that came through. It was Tiffany's. "Margaret," she snapped, skipping any pretense of civility. "What did you do?" "The bank just called. They said our accounts are frozen. Our accounts." I let her words hang in the air for a beat before answering. "Actually, Tiffany, they're not your accounts. They're mine, all of them." Silence. The kind that prickles the back of your neck. Then, her laugh high-pitched, brittle. "Don't be ridiculous. The will." I cut her off. "The real will. The one Robert signed 6 months before he died. The one that left me 70% of everything. And the house. And, if you didn't already know, your little trust fund was conditional. On how you treated me. Congratulations, Tiffany. You just failed the test." Her mask slipped so fast I could practically hear it shatter. "You senile old—" "Careful," I said, my voice low and sharp. "Every word you say could be evidence. Elder abuse, fraud, conspiracy. I'm sitting in Harrison Fitzgerald's office right now. Detective Rodriguez is here, too. Would you like me to put her on the phone?" I wasn't lying. Harrison had invited the detective that very morning. She was standing across the room, arms folded, eyes like steel. When she heard Tiffany's voice raise, she nodded at me to continue. On the line, Tiffany's tone pivoted just like that from fury to honey. "Margaret, sweetie, there's been a misunderstanding. We were only trying to protect you. Managing estates is complicated. You've never handled that kind of money." There it was, the gaslighting. The same script she always pulled when her lies caught fire. "Protect me?" I let out a dry laugh. "By locking me out of my own house and dropping me at a motel with $200 in cash? That's not protection, Tiffany. That's attempted theft." Behind me, Detective Rodriguez scribbled notes in her pad. "Look," Tiffany said quickly, her voice breaking around the edges. "Maybe we were hasty. Maybe we should meet and talk this through, as a family." Family. That word used to mean comfort. Now it sounded like a bad joke. "Family doesn't shove you out of your own home," I said, my hand tightening around Robert's photograph on Harrison's desk. "Family doesn't forge wills. Family doesn't tell you to go find somewhere else to die." I heard Derek in the background then, his voice muffled but urgent. "Just hang up, Tiff. She's not going to—" "No!" Tiffany shrieked. "She doesn't get to." Then back to me. "Margaret, if you press charges, you'll ruin Derek's life. He's your grandson." My voice turned cold, steady. "And you already tried to ruin mine." Detective Rodriguez mouthed 2 words at me. "Say it." So I did. "Watch me." The silence on the other end lasted 3 full beats. Then the line went dead. By 11:45 a.m., Harrison had filed the injunction to bar Tiffany and Derek from accessing the house. Utility companies were notified. Titles were locked. Every move Tiffany had made to plant her flag in my home was erased in a matter of hours. At exactly 1:03 p.m., my phone buzzed again. This time it was Derek himself. His voice was shaking. "Grandma, please?" Tiffany didn't mean things just got out of hand. "We're under a lot of stress. Kevin's job, the kids." I closed my eyes, hearing the boy he once was the boy who built Lego castles in my living room, who begged me for pancakes shaped like dinosaurs. But that boy was gone, replaced by a man too weak to stand against the woman he married. "Derek," I said softly, "you watched her throw me out like garbage. You stood there while she handed me $200 for a motel, and you said nothing. That silence, that was your choice." He tried again, voice cracking. "We can fix this. Please, don't take it to the police. Don't take it further." But it was already further. Far further. I repeated the words Robert once told me during a particularly hard business deal, words I'd never forgotten. "Decisions have consequences." And then I hung up. By 2:30 p.m., Tiffany's credit card started failing, declined at Nordstrom, declined at Whole Foods. By 3:47 p.m., her name lit up my phone again, desperate now. "Mom," she said, voice syrup, thick. "We can work something out. You don't want this to get ugly." I looked at Detective Rodriguez, who leaned forward, listening. I smiled into the phone, though Tiffany couldn't see it. "Oh, honey," I said. "It's already ugly. But here's the thing about ugly stories, they make the sweetest endings." And then I let her sit in that silence, the silence of someone who just realized the queen had crossed the board. Operation Justice wasn't just underway, it was working. And Tiffany? She was about to learn exactly what happens when you underestimate a woman who has nothing left to lose. There's a certain satisfaction in knowing the law finally has your back. And honey, when the cuffs click on the wrists of people who thought they were untouchable, that sound is sweeter than any hymn. It happened on a Friday evening, 8:32 p.m., sharp. Tiffany and Derek had decided to celebrate what they still believed was their inheritance. They were dining at Le Bernard's, the kind of pretentious downtown bistro where the wine list comes thicker than a Bible, and the waiters look at you like you don't belong unless you're wearing Armani. I wasn't there in person, I didn't need to be. Detective Rodriguez had promised me front row updates, and when my phone buzzed at 8:47, her voice was practically humming. "They're in custody, Margaret." Tiffany screamed about false arrest between bites of filet mignon. Derek just sat there, pale as the tablecloth. "They'll be processed tonight." I poured myself a glass of cheap motel Chardonnay and toasted the peeling wallpaper. For the first time in weeks, victory didn't feel like a dream. It felt real. But you know what happens when snakes are cornered? They slither. By Saturday morning, 9:10 a.m., I had an unexpected visitor at Harrison's office. Eleanor Hayes, Kevin's mother, Tiffany's mother-in-law. A woman carved from diamonds and entitlement. Her entrance was a performance, pearls gleaming, perfume cloud thick enough to choke the air, heels clicking like gunfire on marble. "Margaret," she said smoothly, lowering herself into the leather chair opposite me as if she were royalty granting me an audience. "We need to discuss a resolution." I raised an eyebrow. "Resolution? Your daughter-in-law forged a will, threw me out of my house, and is now facing elder abuse charges. That's not a misunderstanding, Eleanor. That's a crime." Her smile tightened, but her tone never wavered. "Kevin made mistakes. Poor choices, yes. But dragging this through court benefits no one. You're destroying multiple families over paperwork." Paperwork, that's what she called my stolen life. Harrison leaned forward, his tone crisp. "It's not paperwork, Mrs. Hayes. It's fraud. It's felony elder abuse. It's a conspiracy." But Eleanor wasn't listening to him. Her eyes were locked on me. "Margaret, my family is prepared to compensate you for this inconvenience." She slid a crisp envelope across the table. $2 million. Cash. In exchange for dropping the charges. I laughed loud, sharp, bitter. $2 million to walk away from 33? To forgive being shoved out of my home with 2 suitcases and a welfare brochure? Her lips thinned. $5 million then. Final offer. Think of it as a settlement. You'll be comfortable for the rest of your life. Kevin avoids scandal. Tiffany avoids prison. Everybody wins. I leaned forward, meeting her gaze. Everybody except me. Except Robert's memory. Except justice. For the first time, Eleanor's mask cracked. "Margaret, be reasonable. You're 70. How long do you really need $33 million? My son has a career, grandchildren to raise, a reputation." That did it. I slammed my hand on the desk, the sound ricocheting through Harrison's office. "And I had a husband I buried 6 weeks ago. A home I built brick by brick. A life your family tried to erase with one forged signature. Don't you dare lecture me about reputations." Silence fell heavy. Even Harrison blinked, startled by the fire in my voice. Eleanor stood, pearls trembling at her throat. "You'll regret this. We have information about Robert's business dealings, things that could complicate your so-called victory." It was a threat, plain and cold. She swept out of the office before I could respond, her perfume lingering like poison. At 11:27 a.m., my phone buzzed again. A collect call from the county jail. "Tiffany." Against Harrison's advice, I answered. "Margaret," she began, her voice hoarse. "Please, don't do this. Think about Derek. Think about the kids." I almost hung up, but something in me wanted to hear her beg. Funny, I said. I thought about Derek when you locked me out of my house. I thought about the kids when you told me to find somewhere else to die. What did you think about then, Tiffany? Her tone sharpened, desperation bleeding into venom. You're not strong enough to see this through. You'll cave. You always cave. I smiled, though she couldn't see it. Watch me. By 1:45 p.m., Rodriguez called with the update. Tiffany's bail was set at $50,000. Derek's was lower, but neither of them had access to a cent. Every card declined. Every account frozen. Their BMW repossessed by evening. And honey, the irony was almost poetic. They'd thrown me into a budget motel, certain I'd fade into irrelevance. But now, they were the ones locked out penniless, powerless, desperate. Operation Justice wasn't just a plan anymore. It was reality. And as I laid my head on that lumpy Sunset Inn pillow, I whispered to Robert's photograph on the nightstand. They thought I was background. But now I'm holding all the cards. You think the story ends when the handcuffs snap shut. But honey, life has a nasty habit of pulling the rug out just when you start to feel steady again. It was Sunday morning, 7:58 a.m. I was sipping motel coffee, so weak it tasted like dishwater, when Harrison's name lit up my phone. He never called this early unless something was wrong. Margaret, he said, voice tight. We've uncovered something in Robert's files. I think you need to come to the office right away. My heart clenched. Files? What kind of files? Financial. Business. Things I wasn't aware of when we updated the will. By 9:05, I was seated in Harrison's office, the familiar scent of old leather and legal dust wrapping around me like a storm cloud. Beside him sat a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s, hair pulled back in a severe bun. This is Carol Chen, Harrison said. She's a forensic investigator. She's been reviewing Robert's accounts. Carol slid a folder across the desk. Inside were copies of wire transfers, invoices, contracts that didn't make sense, shell companies with no addresses, payments for consulting services that never happened. Mrs. Sullivan, Carol began, her tone professional but not unkind. Your husband was moving money, large sums, over at least 12 years. I frowned, flipping through the documents. Moving money? Robert was meticulous. He balanced our checkbook to the penny. He wasn't careless. Not careless, Carol agreed. Calculated. These transactions suggest money laundering. It looks like his firm may have been washing funds for organized crime. The words hit me like ice water. Money laundering. Organized crime. I shook my head. That's impossible. Robert was stubborn, old-fashioned. He lectured me for overspending on groceries. He wasn't a criminal. Harrison sighed, pushing his glasses higher on his nose. Margaret, I believe Robert started this under pressure. But the scale, it's too sophisticated to be accidental. I stared down at Robert's signature on one of the transfers. Neat, steady, familiar. The same hand that signed birthday cards, mortgage papers, love notes, now tied to something foul. My stomach twisted. So what does this mean? For me? Carol's eyes softened. If the FBI gets hold of this, they could argue that your entire inheritance is tainted proceeds of crime. They could seize everything. The house, the accounts, all of it. The irony nearly knocked the air out of me. Tiffany had stolen my house with a forged will, and I'd fought tooth and nail to get it back. And now? The government could take it anyway, because Robert had been laundering money behind my back. Harrison's phone buzzed. He answered, listened, then went pale. That was the district attorney, Kevin's mother Eleanor. She's already hinted to prosecutors about irregularities in Robert's business. They're threatening to leak it to the FBI unless charges are dropped against Tiffany and Derek. Blackmail. Of course. Snakes don't stop slithering. I closed my eyes, rage bubbling hot beneath the grief. Robert, my Robert, what had you dragged us into? At 11:22 a.m., my phone buzzed again. A blocked number. Against my better judgment, I answered. Margaret, Tiffany's voice slithered through the line. Calm this time. Too calm. I hear you've learned some interesting things about Daddy's business. My grip tightened on the phone. You knew? Oh, honey, Kevin spotted it months ago. He's good with numbers, you know. We realized your inheritance wasn't exactly clean, which means if we tell the FBI, you lose everything. Unless, she paused, savoring the silence, unless you help us make a deal, Drop the charges, split what's left, and we'll all walk away intact. I almost laughed. The audacity. The very woman who locked me out of my own house was now holding Robert's sins over my head. You think you can use Robert's mistakes to erase your crimes? I asked. I think the FBI won't care much about forged paperwork when they find out your husband was laundering money for the Torino family. How do you think they'll look at you, Margaret? A grieving widow? Or an accomplice living off dirty money? Her words sliced deeper than I wanted to admit, because wasn't that the truth? I'd lived in that house, eaten dinners paid for by his salary, hosted parties funded by his accounts. If the money was dirty, wasn't I stained by it too? At 12:01 p.m., I found myself standing in Robert's old study, now filled with Carol's evidence. Papers spread like puzzle pieces. My hands shook as I traced the ink of Robert's signature. "Why didn't you tell me?" I whispered. "Why did you leave me to clean this mess?" No answer came, of course. Just the tick of the clock, steady and merciless. By evening, Harrison sat me down with a cup of tea that tasted of ash. "Margaret, you have two choices. We can go to the FBI ourselves, come clean, and hope they let you keep the house. Or we play Tiffany's game. Let her think she's holding the cards while we build a stronger case." Two choices, both heavy, both cruel. I set down the teacup, my voice steady, in a way that surprised even me. There's always a third choice, and I intend to find it. Because pawns don't just move forward. Sometimes they flip the board entirely. At 9:34 p.m., I called Detective Rodriguez. If I agreed to wear a wire, would the FBI listen? Her pause was brief, her tone sharp. "They'd more than listen, Margaret. They'd kick down doors." I looked at Robert's photo, his smile frozen in a frame, and felt my heart harden. Tiffany thought she'd found my weakness, but what she'd really done was hand me the weapon I needed. "Honey," I whispered to the empty room, "the game just changed. They say the bravest thing you can do is tell the truth. But honey, sometimes the bravest thing is letting the liars talk long enough to bury themselves." It was Tuesday evening, 7:46 p.m., when I found myself standing in front of my motel mirror, watching Detective Rodriguez tape a wire to my chest. The cold metal pressed against my skin, but it wasn't nearly as chilling as the thought of what I was about to do. "Remember," she said, adjusting the mic, "don't provoke them. Let them talk. The FBI will be in the next room, recording everything. You just keep them comfortable enough to brag." Comfortable. Tiffany and Derek were only ever comfortable when they thought they were winning. At exactly 8 p.m., headlights swept across the Sunset Inn parking lot. A sleek black sedan pulled up, spotless despite the rain. Out stepped Tiffany in a cream-colored coat, her hair shellacked into perfection. Derek trailed behind, face drawn, clutching a briefcase like it was a life preserver. I opened the door before they knocked. "Come in," I said, my voice steady, casual, as though I were inviting them for coffee instead of walking them into a federal trap. Tiffany's smile was sugar-coated venom. "Margaret, thank you for agreeing to meet. We can still fix this if you're reasonable." I gestured toward the table, where 3 mismatched motel chairs waited. "Sit. Let's hear your brilliant plan." Derek set the briefcase down with a heavy thud. Tiffany placed her hand over it, nails clicking against the leather. "Inside are documents, immunity agreements, settlement drafts. Here's how this works. You drop the charges, we give the FBI Robert's files, and in exchange, they let us all walk. You keep the house and $5 million in clean assets. Everybody wins." Everybody. That word again. It tasted like poison. I leaned back, folding my arms. "And if I don't agree?" Her eyes glittered. "Then the FBI learns your husband was laundering money for the Torino family. They seize everything. You'll be penniless, homeless. Again." The arrogance rolled off her like perfume. "And honey," she reeked of it. "Funny," I said, keeping my tone light, almost amused. "You talk like you're holding all the cards. But Robert always said the one with the quietest hand wins the game." Derek shifted uncomfortably. "Grandma, please, this doesn't have to be a war. We're family." "Family." I nearly laughed. "Family doesn't throw you into a motel with $200 in cash. Family doesn't forge wills. Family doesn't blackmail." Tiffany's mask cracked for just a second, her smile tightening. "Don't act so innocent. You've been living off dirty money for years. You think the FBI cares whether you knew or not. Once this blows up, you're tainted. At least with our deal, you get to keep a piece." I let her words hang in the air, the silence heavy. Then, softly, I said, "What makes you so sure the FBI hasn't already heard this?" Her eyes narrowed. "What are you talking about?" That's when the knock came. 3 sharp raps at the door, 8:23 p.m. on the dot. The door swung open, and in poured the FBI. Agent Sarah Martinez led the charge, badge flashing, her voice crisp. "Tiffany Sullivan Hayes and Derek Sullivan, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud, elder abuse, and attempted extortion of a federal witness." The look on Tiffany's face, shock, curdling into horror, was worth every motel night, every sleepless hour. Derek's briefcase was snatched up before he could even reach for it. "Federal witness?" Tiffany stammered, her voice shrill. "She's lying. She's manipulating you." Agent Martinez didn't even blink. "The wire on her chest tells us otherwise. Every word you said tonight is recorded." Derek sagged in his chair, defeated. Tiffany, though, still fought, her voice cracking as agents cuffed her wrists. "Mom, you can't do this. We're family." I stood slowly, looking her straight in the eye. "No, we're DNA. Family is what protects you when you're weak. DNA is what betrays you when you least expect it." Her face went pale, her eyes wide with disbelief. "Margaret," Agent Martinez said, her tone respectful now, "we'll need you to come down to the field office tomorrow. We'll go through the files and clear your record." Clear my record. Words I never thought I'd need. At 8:46 p.m., the sedan was gone, replaced by FBI SUVs carrying Tiffany and Derek away. I stood in the motel doorway, rain misting the air, and for the first time in months, I felt taller, stronger. Robert had left me a mess, yes. But Tiffany? She'd handed me the chance to clean it up. I closed the door, peeled the wire from my chest, and whispered to the empty room. "The irony is so perfect, it's almost poetic. You tried to bury me, Tiffany, but you just gave me the shovel to dig myself out. Watch me." They thought the story would end with me in a motel room, clutching 2 suitcases and waiting for the end. But honey, the best revenge isn't survival, it's reinvention. 3 weeks after Tiffany and Derek were led away in handcuffs, I stood at the threshold of 847 Oakwood Drive, my house. The front door, once slammed in my face, now opened with a satisfying creak as the locksmith handed me the keys. "Welcome home, Mrs. Sullivan," he said, tipping his cap. Home. The word hit me harder than I expected. Inside, Tiffany's chaos was everywhere. Half-emptied designer bags scattered on the couch, jewelry boxes overturned, children's toys abandoned mid-floor. It was like she'd been trying to erase me, stuffing her identity into every corner. I walked through each room slowly, fingertips grazing the walls I had painted, the shelves Robert and I had built, the kitchen I'd fed 3 generations from. And with every step, I felt the truth settle in. This was mine again. Not just legally, not just financially, morally, spiritually. By 2:14 p.m., garbage bags were lined by the curb, filled with Tiffany's belongings. Let her pick them up when she made bail. If she made bail? But here's the thing about a house. It's more than wood and stone. It's memory. And for too long, mine had been painted over by Robert's shadow, then trampled by Tiffany's greed. So I started fresh. Robert's old study? No longer a shrine to his business deals. It became my art studio, sunlight flooding through new windows, canvases leaning in bright defiance. The wine cellar Tiffany had dreamed of? A library instead, lined with books I'd always meant to read but never had time for. For the first time in decades, my house reflected me. At 5:02 p.m., that same day, Harrison called. His voice was almost cheerful. "The FBI's finished their review. Margaret, your inheritance is clean. Robert's cooperation as an informant absolved you of liability. Every penny is legally yours." I sank into my new armchair, laughter bubbling out of me like champagne. Tiffany had tried to use Robert's secrets to blackmail me, only to discover those secrets made me bulletproof. The irony was so perfect, it was almost poetic. 2 weeks later, 11:17 a.m., I signed papers establishing the Margaret Sullivan Foundation for Elder Protection. $15 million dedicated to helping seniors facing the same kind of betrayal I had endured. Legal aid, shelters, advocacy, because if it happened to me, it was happening to countless others, quietly, in homes across the country. The media loved it. Headlines blared, from victim to advocate. Widow turns betrayal into national cause. Interviews followed. My story wasn't just mine anymore. It belonged to every woman who'd ever been called just the wife, every grandmother shoved aside as in the way. And Tiffany? From her jail cell, she tried writing me letters. 17 of them, in fact. Some apologetic, some angry, some dripping with excuses. I stopped opening them after the third. Because here's the truth. Words are easy. Choices are what matter. At 9 a.m., on a rainy Thursday, her lawyer called. "Mrs. Sullivan, my client wishes to reconcile, for the sake of the grandchildren." I thought about it for a long moment before answering. "Tell your client, family isn't blood, it's loyalty." And she chose greed over loyalty. That's not family, that's DNA. Silence on the other end. Then, a resigned sigh. 6 months later, the Netflix crew arrived. They wanted to turn my ordeal into a limited series, The Mother's Revenge. I let them in, on one condition: that every dollar of my fee went into the foundation. Because, honey, revenge tastes sweeter when you serve it with purpose. The night before filming, I stood in my art studio, brush in hand, staring at a half-finished canvas. It was a self-portrait. Not the grieving widow, not the discarded mother-in-law, but a woman standing in sunlight, head high, eyes unflinching. The kind of woman Tiffany never believed I could be. As I rinsed my brushes, I caught my reflection in the window. Older, yes, weathered, yes, but also sharper, stronger. And I whispered the words that had carried me through every betrayal, every motel night, every courtroom twist. Watch me, because pawns don't just become queens. Sometimes they rewrite the whole damn game. If you're watching this, don't forget to subscribe and tell me where you're tuning in from. And answer me honestly, would you forgive or would you fight? Because, honey, sometimes the line between family and DNA makes all the difference.